Jobsworth, Season 1, Episode 5, Me, a GP and ADHD. Welcome to Episode 5 of Jobsworth. You're about to hear a conversation I had with the nation's sweariest GP, Dr. Zoe Watson. It's an unsubstantiated claim, but I'm looking into it. Zoe has over 17 years' experience working in the NHS and is the founder of Good Wellbeing, an online wellbeing membership designed for busy people with busy brains. She's also the founder of Make and Create, a creative company focusing on mental health, which launched in 2018. Zoe has experienced anxiety, depression, and in more recent years, burnout. And we have an honest and very real discussion about the tools she uses to look after her own mental health. We explore how being diagnosed with ADHD as an adult has influenced her relationship with work and the mission of Good Wellbeing, as well as the challenges businesses face when it comes to building more inclusive and supportive environments for neurodiverse individuals in the workplace. We also tackle a phenomenon that Zoe calls weaponised wellness, a term she's coined to describe businesses who use wellness as a law to attract employees, but have simply implemented tick box strategies to make themselves look good. Zoe pulls no punches. This is a conversation that will resonate with, well, everyone. And her honest, no bullshit approach is incredibly refreshing. Her answer to my question about companies measuring the ROI on wellbeing is a perfect example. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the force of nature that is Dr. Zoe Watson. So Zoe, thank you so much for coming on and investing your time in having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
No worries, very welcome.
Cool. Okay, so we do have an opening tradition on this podcast, and we're kind of like 6-7 episodes in now, so it's something that I like to try and keep going in every episode. So I'm going to ask you a question, if that's okay. So
yeah.
When you were at school, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Depends which part of school you ask me about. At primary school, I wanted to be a dentist during the day and a ballerina at night, and I thought that was a viable career prospect.
Okay.
And then I think for a large part of my sort of older years, I wanted to be a vet.
Right.
For a long time. And then I think probably around about the age of 14, 15, I settled on medicine. And the reason that I decided against veterinary medicine was because I love animals too much, and I didn't think I could ever put an animal down to sleep.
Yeah.
But humans, yeah, fine with that.
The moral question around that is not an issue at all. Yeah. That's really interesting, because I guess before going into this, I didn't think about how much of a vocation that going into medicine feels for a lot of people as well, and what the drivers are, the motivation to send you down that path. Did you have any inspiration around you to send you down that route, or any pressure, dare I say, from people around you to go into medicine?
Really not, actually. Like, neither of my parents are medical. Well, they're not doctors. They both are sort of a mix of science and art. Like, my dad, who's now retired, was a lecturer in pharmacy at Strathclyde his whole life, Strathclyde University in Glasgow.
Yeah.
But also is a very creative man. He sings, he plays various instruments.
Oh, wow.
He's a massive hippie. Both of my parents are massive hippies. And my mum has a degree in biology and wrote abstracts for medical journals for many years, but also has always been an artist. And now she's a full-time printmaker in Glasgow and has been for like the last 30 years, I think.
Amazing.
So,
right.
Yeah, so sort of I grew up with that around me. So it's probably not a surprise that I've kind of adopted that in my own life with my various businesses and doing medicine. But
yeah, amazing. Because there is that hybridization around, I guess, what you do with obviously being a GP. So there's, I can imagine being around science and going into medicine isn't too much of a stretch. So you've got at least those conversations and that world around you already. And then the creative side, so talking about Make and Create that you launched as well, and how that's being used as a tool to help people with mental health and well-being as well. Do you have a particular art or creative style that you're into? Is there anything that you fall into within a niche, or do you just like creation as a method of expression and mindfulness? Or
I think probably the latter, to be honest. Like, I find it really interesting when I talk to people, and I spoke about this recently at a talk that I did for Sick in the City about this concept that people either identify as being creative or not. And my motto with Make and Create is that creativity is a verb. It's not a natural born talent. It's simply something that you do. And I think as adult humans, we get very anxious about what the end product will be. So often we choose not to create if we don't identify as being creative. And the whole idea of Make and Create is actually trying to get adults to kind of put that idea to the side and just simply, pick up whatever it is they're drawn to. Like I personally will just dabble in everything and anything that I'm drawn to. I mean, as part of Make and Create, all of the workshops that I run, which is everything from mindful essential oil blending, candle making, working with jesmonite, macrame.
Wow.
And all of those things are self-taught. I didn't go anywhere to learn them. I just learnt them through reading and watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Falling down the rabbit hole is a lovely thing that my ADHD brain likes to do. And so yeah, I'm entirely self-taught. And then so I wanted to sort of show people that it's something that if you want to do it, there's nothing stopping you but yourself. Like if there's something that you want to learn, or indeed even if you're not that good at it, it doesn't matter. It's the point is that the act of creating is soothing in itself.
It's the process. Yeah. I mean, I definitely fall into the mindset of someone that says you either are or aren't creative innately. And it's only because of the situation, my family. So my brother and my mum are artists by trade.
Oh, really?
So my brother's been an artist and is incredibly successful. My mum's been an artist for 30 plus years now. That has been her full-time occupation. And I don't seem to have inherited any of that gene. So that I've always seen it as a more innate thing. But I do also buy into the act of creating, and creativity is incredibly powerful. And just because you don't feel like you are a quote creative person doesn't mean you're still not going to get something from doing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Things.
And I think creativity takes many forms. Like I often say that, the GP consultation itself is an art form, because we're spinning so many plates when we're consulting with patients. We're looking at their body language. We're trying to monitor our own body language. We're picking up on nuances and, tone of voice, and then also, going through our red flags and working out an investigation and treatment plan, and planning for worst case scenarios and safety netting. And it is an art form. I think creative thought is a form of creativity. And I one of the things that has always bugged me is that in school, you very much are sort of, particularly in high school, well, when I was at high school back in the 90s, it was very much like you either had to do sciencey subjects or arty subjects, and there wasn't really room in the curriculum to do both. And you were very much kind of like, if I was, I knew by the point I was doing exams that I wanted to go to medical school, so there's no room in my curriculum to do art as well. And I think even back then, the art that we were doing at school, it was very structured. There wasn't a lot of kind of freedom of expression. It was like, well, this is how you do shading, and this is how you do line drawing, and there was rights and wrongs. And I very much believe that there are no rights and wrongs. It's art, but it's a form of self-expression. I mean, if there were rights and wrongs, then Picasso wouldn't have got as far as he did. Because
I'd argue there's a number of examples where that could be said as well. Yeah. It's completely subjective, isn't it? What appeals
Damien
to people
Hirst
and what
pickling
resonates.
sharks.
I'm thinking of Tracy Emin's work as well that just jumped into my mind. The bed,
the unmade bed. I mean, conceptual art. It's very, very much. If someone did that in art class at school, the art teacher would be like, all right, Tracy.
You'd be referred on to someone, wouldn't you? More than likely, yeah. Well, look, I thank you for that, because I think that was actually turned out to be a much more insightful answer than I thought it was going to be, because it leads so much into what you're doing now. And it is, to be fair, part of the reason I ask what you wanted to do and how that links to what you're doing now as a career. So thank you for sharing that, because because it really lends itself well to what it is you're doing now. So can you tell me, I took a look through some of your marketing collateral on your website ahead of the call. On your website in your About section, you said that your time, you grew up in Glasgow and then moved to London. So your time in Glasgow, in your words, shaped your desire for social equality. So I've got two questions around that. When did you move to London? So when did you move away from Glasgow? And how did your experiences growing up shape that desire, if you can go into that?
So I think I actually left Glasgow in 2007, but I didn't come directly to London. I went to Australia first. So I graduated medical school in 2005, did my 2 years of foundation training, and then went off to Australia to work for 3 years, as many junior doctors do, particularly now when the NHS is fucked. So I went and did 3 years of basically A&E, emergency medicine in Australia, which was brilliant. And then I went, when I moved back, I did my GP training down in Brighton in mid Sussex. I've got I've got family there, and I love Brighton by the sea. And then in 2013, I met my husband online, as one does, but I say that we met BTA before the apps. We met on an actual online dating website, kids.
Wow.
Yes, that was a thing. Yeah.
Incredible, yeah.
We met on a website called mysinglefriend.com, because my reasoning was that if he has at least one friend who has written a bio about him, then he's less likely to be a complete weirdo. And it worked out. It worked out well.
Good.
So and he was based in London when we met, and I was still living in Brighton completing my GP training. And so when I finished that, we decided to move in together. So I refer to myself as a reluctant Londoner, because I never planned on living here.
It was a series of unfortunate events, or series of fortunate events, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been here for 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your experience in Glasgow then, because I thought that was quite an impactful statement that you made, that it shaped your desire for social equality. What did you see? What were the experiences you had that kind of drove that, or gave you that drive?
So, I think Glasgow in itself is a very socialist place to live. It's a very left-wing place to live, but also, there is a lot of poverty in Glasgow, and that social inequality is very, very visible. I mean, the same is true of London, to be honest. I think a lot of people have this perception that London is a very, very rich city, and it is, but there are also huge pockets of poverty, and they're juxtaposed with extreme wealth. But I think growing up in Glasgow, there is just very much this mentality of helping others, that everyone is equal, and that there's also a bit of tall poppy syndrome, I think, which is, I think not the best, because I think they as much as they embrace people and are very, very friendly, they also kind of like you to stay in your lane a little bit. And if you start getting above your station, they're like, check you out. Do you think you are? They are. And so I do think I've absorbed that a little bit. My business coach calls it the Glaswegian crab. I don't know if you've ever heard.
I've not heard that expression.
No. The crab in a bucket analogy, which is that apparently there's a phenomenon that if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, if one of them starts to crawl up the side to escape, the other crabs will pull him back down, because of this, if we're in the bucket, you're in the bucket, mate. Would you think you're going? Get back in the bucket.
It's a good analogy. I can see the imagery around it. Yeah.
And so, I've got a very loud inner critic, and when I was building wellbeing, and I was just filled with, all this self-doubt and this, do you think you are? And so we had to give my inner critic a name, and we've called it the Glaswegian crab, because it is rooted in my Glaswegian upbringing, this sort of sense of not getting above your station, not kind of straying from your lane. But so I guess my growing up in Glasgow has both negatively and positively impacted my sort of journey in business, if you like, because it keeps me very grounded.
Yes.
And I think it keeps me from, drinking the Kool-Aid, swallowing my own bullshit and inserting my head up my rectum to continue swallowing my own bullshit. Like, I'm very self-aware.
Yes.
One of my steepest learning curves in the world of business, because I mean, coming from the world of medicine into the world of business has been a very steep learning curve for me. But one of my biggest takeaways is that 98% of what people do in business is bullshit. Like, there's just a lot of.
You're not supposed to tell everyone that.
But I think it's a very recent realization for me, because I'm naturally a very kind of open and honest person. Like, I don't really have the ability to be anything other than who I am. And then this realization that in order to get places in business, like, most people will sprinkle a little bit of bullshit in there to get to where they want to be. And I find it very much opposes my values and ethics. So I've been wrestling with this for 5 years that I've been in business, just going, how are these people making millions of? No, they're not making. Are they making millions of pounds? I don't know. I don't know anymore. I'm on LinkedIn just going, are they making millions of pounds a week, or is this bullshit?
Well, yeah, I share a lot of that sentiment. Obviously I work in an industry, being recruitment, that has a lot of. There's a lot of what people would term salesmanship in recruitment, and painting a picture that isn't always the case as well. And I've really struggled with that. And I think authenticity is one thing. When I read your website, I think I responded to I'd signed up to your newsletter as well. And the first thing I thought was that I love your style of writing. There's not many websites that are trying to appeal to businesses in the corporate world that use swear words. But again, I use swear words in a lot of my copy. I'm not averse to swearing at all. But it was just so authentic. So I don't think anyone could accuse you of not putting yourself out there in a really honest and transparent way. But there is an element of having to play the game sometimes in order to get paid from it. Because we could all do this value add thing and give it away for free. But at the same time, it's still your time and your energy that takes you away from other things that could be paying you. So how to offset that and how to get the balance right, I think, is key. So you've hit a point that I think a lot of business and owners and founders would be feeling as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think I basically come into the world of business from having worked in the world of medicine and having no business training at all. And I think, that definitely colours how I sort of communicate. And I bloody love swearing. Like, it's part of my culture. Like, I use it to emphasize what I'm saying. I don't do it in an aggressive way. I do it in a way that, if used correctly, it makes people laugh. I use it with patients. And you have to, a very well-timed swear word with a patient can literally change the consultation and the relationship that you have with that patient. You have to judge it, but done correctly, it works. It works wonders.
Swear words mixed with a bit of EQ, emotional intelligence, empathy, and timing, a bit of comedy in there as well. It can change, as you say, that the whole tone of a conversation, or win people over, or soften the impact of news that you're delivering as well. Whatever it is, and I guess that's something you've had to do over your career as well. Okay, so the move to London happened, and then I could focus a little bit on the sort of chronology, but I feel like we could be talking for hours about that as well of that time. I'm just gonna go to paraphrase a segment of your website, if that's okay. I'm going to read it directly back to you, because I think this embodies why, and you can tell me if this is right or not, but embodies why you've started Wellbeing. So this is quoted from your website. I meet so many patients every single day who are suffering with enormous amounts of work stress. They feel undervalued, overstretched. They don't feel listened to. They're exhausted, frustrated, and having to go on sick leave due to mental illness. I created this place. I've inserted brackets here, Wellbeing, specifically for those people. I read that, and it gave me goosebumps. It sort of made you tingle because it resonated with me so much. Yeah. People hearing that, I think it will potentially do the same. I don't think I'm abnormal, so I think it might do the same. So in a nutshell, that's why you've created Wellbeing. Yeah. What I think that's so perfectly and poignantly put as well. Before we go on to talk about, I guess, that mission and how you're enacting that now, can you tell me a bit about your own experience around that? Because you mentioned in your About section anxiety, depression, and burnout as well in more recent years. Can you tell me a bit more about your experience with that, if you don't mind going into a bit of detail, Zoe? And
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think the other aspect of that is that I was diagnosed with ADHD last year.
Okay.
I'm not on medication for it, but for me, it has felt like not maybe the final piece of the puzzle, but one of the final pieces of the puzzle, because I think it's very, very well known that people with ADHD experience all of those things: anxiety, depression, and burnout. And we don't really know if it's because it's sort of similar genetic makeup, or sometimes it's because existing in a neurotypical world as someone who's neurodivergent creates those things. So the anxiety of trying to fit yourself into a neurotypical world as someone who is neurodivergent is very anxiety inducing,
yes,
and can also result in depression. And people who have ADHD are at a much, much higher risk of burnout for various different reasons. And side note to that, wellbeing is sort of going, as well as doing all the workplace wellbeing stuff, we're going much more in the direction of kind of like neurodiversity in the workplace, and also kind of coaching for women with ADHD, one-on-one peer support, all that sort of stuff. So that's all being added into Wellgood, because my diagnosis essentially came after I built Wellgood Wellbeing, and then I suddenly realised that I'd actually created the perfect platform for people who have ADHD, because I built it for busy people, which is most of us, but then I realised it's perfect for busy-brained people as well. But yeah, I mean, I think I first started experiencing mental health difficulties probably around about the age of 18. And it's been on and off throughout my life. I think it's funny when you talk about mental health problems to maybe people who haven't experienced them. I think people have this perception that, depression is you're just stuck in your room crying all the time and not able to do life, or anxiety is living in this constant state of constant anxiety. And it very much isn't that. It waxes and wanes. You have good days and bad days. And so you can be someone who has depression and appear to be quite normal to the external world, which I guess is why, so many, it's such a hidden disease, because so many people have it and live with it, but their loved ones may not know about it, which is why I talk about it, because I think it's important that people know that it's really common, as that there's no such thing as like being the correct amount of depressed. It's mental illness,
optimum level.
Mentally, oh, you're not sad enough today, I thought you were depressed, why are you laughing,
you're okay,
and I think there is a bit of a kind of like, well, she says she's depressed but she seems fine. And I think there's an element of, well, you have to accept that what people are telling you is true. And I definitely think I've struggled with work because of mental illness, but I think actually I've struggled with work more than anything because of undiagnosed ADHD. And what made me realise this was actually the pandemic. So the pandemic, I actually was on maternity leave when COVID hit. My daughter was born in December 2019. And I was only planning on taking 6 months of maternity leave because I'm self-employed and that's all I had enough money for. And then obviously COVID sort of reared its head in March 2020. And I was in this very weird situation of watching all of my friends who were doctors and nurses, be on the front line of this, at the time, largely unknown, for want of a danger, I guess I was going to say evil, but danger, and watching them all get sick and feeling this overwhelming feeling of guilt mixed with like being scared and like wondering whether I should leave my baby at home and go work. So I mean, anyway, I didn't, because my husband was just like, don't be mental. Like, just like, no, we need you here. Please don't go.
Yeah.
So when I eventually did go back to work, the landscape of general practice had changed. It was largely telephone, remote consultations. So we would still see, we are still seeing patients face to face, but we were operating on a telephone first basis, which
Yep.
many practices still are. And I suddenly realised I was getting a lot less exhausted. I wasn't coming home feeling completely numb and unable to speak, which was what would usually happen. And I could work for more hours and not feel as completely burnt out. And I realised after my diagnosis, it's because for me, seeing patients face to face is much more sensory overwhelming than telephoning them, because I'm not dealing with lots of different sensory input. I'm just phoning them, and I'm phoning them on my schedule as opposed to waiting for them to turn up. So one of the things I also really get irritated about was that I always run to time as a GP, believe it or not, but my patients would often turn up really late, usually because they would expect the GP to be running late, so they would turn up late, or, you know, life chaos, whatever. So I used to get really annoyed when patients turned up late when I was running to time, and then I would run late because they'd turned up late. Whereas when I'm contacting patients off my telephone list, I'm in control of that. So I realised that all of those things had made my working life as a doctor much less overwhelming. And I think a lot of it was down to the fact that, I had undiagnosed ADHD, and I was just drowning in sensory input every single day, seeing 30, 40 patients a day and constantly changing pace, dealing with phone calls and pop-up messages and, you know, all the rest of it. And I was just like drowning in that. But the pandemic sort of fixed a lot of that. Yeah.
Are you still involved in face-to-face consultation now?
No, at the moment I work largely remotely. Like I'm probably going to go back to doing a bit of face-to-face work, but if I could keep it as just remote work, then I would, because it's so much better for my mental health. Working in that way, it just allows me to. I think it allows me to be a better GP. I mean, in all honesty, 90% of GP work can be done remotely. And I get that. I mean, some patients love it. It's interesting. I think the working population prefer it this way because they don't have to take the morning off work to come and see their GP. I think the people who struggle with it, and I completely understand this, and I think there needs to be some sort of resolution come to this, because I do think we miss things. Is the elderly population, they really struggle because they miss that contact, and they also just, I think, struggle just to communicate more remotely over the phone. And I think there needs to be some sort of halfway point where, you know, we're giving more face-to-face appointments straight away to elderly people, because I think they, more than anything, are suffering from telephone first based consultation.
I think another example of that, albeit in a very different way, is banks as well, all moving to online banking. Yeah. High streets are losing banks at a rate of knots. There's pop-up banks that come into community centres now to try and do outreach, but that's once a week. Yeah. And you have to be accepting of the fact that, there are generational differences between how people engage with things as well. So one of my questions, funnily enough, is around how technology, or your views on how technology could support workplace well-being. But from what you're saying, it's been a huge shift for you in how you can manage your workload. But you also have to think about patients or people on the other end of that as well. So it's not your problem to fix, but it's good that you can highlight that as being a potential issue as well.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel for the older generation, because I just think things have moved so quickly, I think, in the last 10 years, and technology evolved so quickly. And I think also the fact that we've become a largely cashless society, I think that they struggle with that as well. Like, it's
it's a big difference, isn't it? And it's only been accelerated by the pandemic and the ways of working, and this huge shift as well. And it's really interesting, actually, that your experience of work and has improved because of the autonomy and freedom to do it remotely as well. So one of the questions I was going to ask actually is when you were diagnosed with ADHD and when that came in the chronology of setting up Wellbeing as well. You've already answered that question.
Yeah.
We came to meet, so to speak, on LinkedIn, and there was an article that you shared. I think someone invited you to make a comment on this article from a journalist at the Times around ADHD, and there was a lot of noise at the time around ADHD being... I've put the quote. So the journalist in the article said, everyone is a little bit ADHD. And I had just at that time, I mean, your way of combating that article was so eloquently put. And I think at the time I'd read a book by Johan Hari called Stolen Focus. And I was just getting involved in the conversation and engaging from the side that maybe there is an overdiagnosis. Now I'm coming at it from a completely ignorant, unspecialized view, and I wasn't trying to make it out like I was a specialist, but that was how we engaged, and that's how we started having this conversation. So I did want to ask some questions around that as well, and what your view is now on the narrative that seems to have still be going around that ADHD is potentially being diagnosed, and that it is more about the societal things that we have going on around us that is probably being labelled as ADHD. Now, I know your answer, I know your response to this is going to be that's not the case, but why do you think that's getting so much weight behind it at the moment and still so much airtime is being discussed around that?
I think because it's a shift, it's a change. People don't really understand it, and I think it is also quite a complex thing to understand, because I think with any condition, any disease that is talked about a lot, or that we see rising incidents of, I think if you're not medically trained, you think, there's a lot of it around because there's a lot more of it happening, but actually that's not always the case. The incidence of things rise because we get better tests, or because more people are coming to be diagnosed. So the concept of incidence and prevalence is quite an important thing to understand when you're looking at disease and condition patterns. So with ADHD, and I think I do think the patriarchy comes into this a little bit, because largely the people that are coming forward to be diagnosed with adult late diagnosis ADHD are women.
Interesting.
And,
okay.
The patriarchy doesn't like that, because it's a form of empowerment having that diagnosis, because it helps you understand who you are. And so there is, understanding incidence and prevalence, because essentially what happens is that with things like ADHD and autism, because autism is also, the diagnosis is on the rise, but it's with these conditions, you generally don't know you have them until a lot of people have a light bulb moment. And I think it's because we don't inherently as humans really talk about our internal world. We don't talk about how our brain works. It's just not really something you do. You just assume that everyone's brain kind of works like yours. And it's only when people start talking about their internal world and how they experience the world, and that they have, got X, Y, or Z diagnosis, the cogs start turning, and people have these light bulb moments. And they go, "Oh my God, this all makes sense. That's me. I recognize myself in what this person is saying." Most people, most neurodivergent folk, if you speak to them about how they got their diagnosis, they will say, "Oh, I watched this presentation," or "I spoke to this person," or "I met this person." For me, it was another GP who did a presentation at a CPD day that I went to, and she talked about her own experience of being diagnosed with ADHD, and she put up a picture of the contents of her handbag, and I went, "Oh, fuck." That's me. And everything she said, I was like, "That's me, that's me,
Right.
that's me." And I'd been out of context. I'd been wondering about ADHD in my son, and then I started learning more about it myself. And then when she did this presentation, I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I kind of went down that route, and got a diagnosis decided not to go on treatment. But I think the rise of ADHD as a diagnosis is because it's in the press more, it's being talked about more people are being exposed to the concept of ADHD, more people are doing their own kind of research on it, doing their own self-assessments and coming forward to have an official diagnosis. So in summary, it's not that it's like a sudden mass onset of ADHD. The ADHD has always been there. It's just that it's now being recognised and given a label.
And identified. Yeah, understood completely. When you had that light bulb moment and then decided, and I guess you're a lot more informed than other people would be on how to get a diagnosis, what were the steps to actually getting diagnosed? So you go from, so many of those things on that list in that presentation resonate with me. What do I do from that point?
So at that point, it was quite a steep learning curve myself because I didn't really know.
Right.
I now know heaps about it, and I actually did a really good. I've got a pinned post on my Instagram page about exactly how to get an adult ADHD.
Brilliant. We can share that in the notes as well on the back of the episode if that's okay, or I can direct people to your profile. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it isn't straightforward, and it does vary from area to area. In England, you can either go to your GP and get referred locally, or you can go to your GP and ask to be referred on something called right to choose, which doesn't just apply to ADHD referrals, it actually applies to any referral. And right to choose essentially is that you have the right to choose who you're referred to. So you can be referred to a specific hospital. It doesn't even have to be a hospital locally. If you live in London, you can ask to be referred to a hospital in Manchester. That's your right to choose.
Right.
You can choose a specific consultant as well. That is your right to choose. So with adult ADHD assessments, there are huge, years-long waiting lists on the NHS. So right to choose, as part of trying to resolve this bottleneck, NHS England have employed a few private providers. They've subcontracted them to do NHS work. So there are places like Psych UK who will do ADHD assessments, and the waiting list is, I think, quite a bit shorter than if you go on the NHS. The other option is going private. The only issue with that is that if you do end up on medication, your GP can't take over prescribing because it's a private provider and it's a specialist medication, and you need a shared care agreement in place, which private providers generally don't do.
Okay.
So right to choose is usually your best option. I've forgotten what else. Oh yeah, it's different in Scotland. Scotland doesn't have right to choose. Wales also doesn't have right to choose. And I think in Wales and Scotland, I don't know about Northern Ireland, but it's a bit trickier. And I'm actually in the process of trying to write some posts on exactly how you do that in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, because it's a slightly different process. But generally, in those places, your GP would be your first port of call. But also, very important to say that self-diagnosis is widely accepted to be a valid form of diagnosis, certainly by me. Other people may disagree, but I think if you're doing self-diagnosis with the right tools, one of which is a questionnaire called the DIVA-5, which is what psychiatrists actually use to do your assessment.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest things for me coming out of my ADHD diagnosis, one of the biggest things I've found helpful was peer support, connecting with other women, other female doctors who understood what I was going through. You don't need an official diagnosis for that. The only reason you need an official diagnosis is if you want medication and if you want that validation of a professional telling you that you have ADHD. And also, I mean, I think I'm maybe minimizing official diagnosis a bit because it is important to get an official diagnosis because ADHD can masquerade as other things. Like there are loads of things that look a little bit like ADHD, but aren't. I mean, autism is one. Autism mimics ADHD. There's lots of crossover. It often coexists. Anxiety also. So having a sort of trained healthcare professional have those differentials in their head is important, because I think oftentimes when you're doing an ADHD assessment, there is a bit of confirmation bias going on because you're expecting it to be that's what you're looking for, so that's what you might find. So I think, be careful with self-diagnosis, but it is very much a valid, accepted form of diagnosis if you're wanting to access peer support and all that sort of thing, even coaching.
The next question, funny enough, was going to be what's your opinion on self-diagnosis, which you've answered perfectly there as well. Because I think if that's what gets you started on the journey to self-discovery and learning more about the condition and how you can manage that, the peer support piece is definitely something that wellbeing, I think you mentioned, is starting to introduce more of now moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, so essentially, after I built wellbeing, I think I'd pretty much built the whole thing, and I think I got my diagnosis just before I launched. And then I looked at it and I was like, I've basically created a wellbeing platform for someone like me, because I really struggle, and it's a well-known thing. I really struggle to look after my personal well-being, all aspects of it. Eating properly, remembering to exercise. All of those things are really hard because of the executive dysfunction that comes hand in hand with ADHD and autism to an extent, because there's a lot of executive dysfunction in autism as well. And I suddenly realised that I'd essentially built a very neurodivergent friendly wellbeing platform. So it wasn't just perfect for people who are really busy, it was perfect for people who had very busy brains as well. And so more and more I have sort of wanted to add more aspects of that into the platform, and I realized that I probably needed to be quite central to that, because at the moment the WellGood platform is kind of like a well-being library, like a sort of bento box of well-being resources that you can dip in and dip out of. There's articles written by me, but there's also yoga, breath work, Pilates, nature videos, funny cat videos. But it's like watch it for 10 minutes, sprinkle it throughout your day. And there's at the moment, like, I don't do any kind of regular sessions on there with my members. And I think what is missing for me at the moment is actually me just running group sessions where we do a bit of group coaching about, looking after your well-being when you have ADHD, as well as, just that peer support and connecting people so that they feel less alone. And then also doing expert masterclasses on people neurodivergent folk who run various businesses, because there's so many ADHD business owners. It's thought that about, I think it's like 25% of people, entrepreneurs, are neurodivergent.
Really?
And it's not surprising when you think about the difficulties that we have in structured work. And one of the biggest things that causes problems in the workplace is communication. That causes so many problems. One of the most stressful things for anyone, but particularly neurodivergent folk, is sort of unilateral change that isn't discussed with people. So one of the things I really struggled with when I was working for a certain digital healthcare company, who shall not be named because they're evil, they've just gone bankrupt, and they were actually the inspiration for WellGood Wellbeing, because I had such an awful experience with them. I was like, they implemented what I call weaponised wellness, which is where corporate companies, really common in startups now, they say, oh, we're really big on well-being, flexible working, work-life balance. And they say, oh, you're free gym membership, we've got cereal, granola year-round, green smoothies on tap. Yeah, fruit bowls, desk yoga.
Yeah,
we've got all this stuff. And people go, oh, that's great, or sign me up. And then they arrive and realize it's the same bullshit in a different wrapper. Or worse, it's a company who thinks they're actually doing really well with their company well-being, but actually they've created a very sort of non-inclusive type of well-being, where they're doing weight loss challenges and step challenges and not realizing how awful that is, and just like how bad that can make their employees feel if they can't do the step challenges because they've got arthritis, or they struggle with losing weight and it's making them feel really bad about themselves. Like, they unilaterally impose these wellness strategies that are just so superficial when they haven't dealt with the toxic workplace culture.
Well, that was an increase during the pandemic that I started to see. Obviously, a lot of companies were trying. There were companies that had a genuine goal of really supporting their people through that time. There were other businesses that saw it as an exercise to make talent attraction, as they call it, a little easier by having these sort of packaged well-being offerings as part of their benefits as well. And you could tell from a mile off the ones that were serious about it and the ones that weren't. Some people were treating it like a checkbox exercise, while others really wanted to understand and also understand that one size fits all is not something you can apply to something like this. Well-being, work-life balance, it's all subjective. It all differs for people. I can't remember off the top of my head, Zoe, but I saw on your website, and I think on some of your posts, you've got, I call them pillars, but it's not the right thing. Is there 5 or 6 things that you focus on?
So I've removed a couple of those, sort of streamlined it, I think, since I launched, but it's mind, body. It started off as mind, body, soul, soil, society, savvy. I've kind of removed a couple of them, but the premise is that it's not just about you. So mind, body, soul, important for looking after your brain, your body, and your spirituality, whatever form that takes. It's not just about religion. But then soil is about connection to nature, and I think it's not something that necessarily is thought about, but actually being outside and even just being in your garden and listening to birds singing, and just that grounding yourself on Mother Earth and not just living in the world of work and digital technology, I think is a really important thing to remember to do, to go outside and breathe fresh air. And society is about connection to your fellow humans, and also thinking about your fellow humans, giving back to society, thinking about your privilege in this world and your place and how you can help others. Because I think one of the things that bugs the shit out of me with the world of wellness is that it is inherently so, it's navel gazing. It's so selfish. It's all about, oh, what about me and how do I feel and how do I fit into the world? And I'm just like, yeah, but like, look at all the things you have. And I know that feeds into like gratitude and all that fucking bollocks, but it's not just about that. It's about realizing your privilege and your place on this earth, and realizing that it isn't just about how you feel. It's about like looking at the world around you and perceiving what others are going through and how that relates to your life. All of that shit drives me nuts. It's just like, oh, shut up.
Well, I mean, again, a lot of what you're saying resonates with me. The whole aspect of really, it's a lot of plate spinning, isn't it, as well? And it could be really hard to try and keep a focus on all those areas that you've listed. From my own personal experience and challenges I've been through in life as well, soil for me was one of the biggest things, being out and being grounded in nature, and just it's that understanding that the world is bigger than you. And I think that depression, which my experience of suffering from depression on and off over the years as well, has been that it's one of the most insular, selfish things that can happen. You can be in your own head, and actually sometimes being dragged out of that to understand that it's not all about you is what needs to happen.
Absolutely. It's the thing I say over and over and over again. And it's not about minimizing your depression, and it's not about saying what you're going through isn't valid. It's about opening up your eyes to the rest of the world. And like I often say, one of the best things you can do when you're really struggling with your mental health is actually to go and volunteer and like go and give back to your community. Because not only do you get to connect with other humans, you also get to see what other humans are going through, and it's a very humbling experience, I think, to see that. And I mean, depression is awful, and it's just such a hard disease to live with. And when you're in that place where everything feels pointless, it's so hard to pull yourself out of it. But I think in some ways, what sort of volunteering and giving back to community does is, in depression, a lot of people struggle to pull themselves out of it because they think they don't deserve it, and it feels like a selfish act to even bother looking after themselves. But often when we have very loud inner critics, if you flip it and say, actually, why don't you go and look after somebody else for a bit? And then it has a similar effect. It sort of pulls us out, because what we're doing isn't for us, it's for other people.
Yes.
And it's just this very interesting mind shift that happens. Particularly if you're someone who really struggles with like self-worth. and loud inner critic. So flipping the switch and just saying, okay, let's, forget about you for a minute. Let's go and see, maybe go to a soup kitchen or a community garden. And I guess that is what social prescribing is about. Social prescribing has come up, through the ranks a lot in recent years in general practice. We do quite a lot of social prescribing now, with variable results, because I think, some people's depression is so severe that they just can't even comprehend leaving the house. So it has to be judged right, and it has to be done in a way that doesn't feel patronizing. I think that's what's important, is that you don't talk down to people and don't be like, no, why have you tried doing some gardening? Because a lot of GPs, like, they'll try and sort of suggest things like that to patients, but it often just comes back as really
patronizing or condescending, or
really condescending. And it's like, you've got to pitch it right. You've got to caveat it. You've got to say to people, look, this is not going to solve everything. It's not going to suddenly make you go, oh, my depression is cured. I've taken up gardening, and you skip to work every day. You've got to caveat it and say, look, this is a thing. I'm not saying it's going to fix everything. Try it. If it doesn't work, we'll try this, we'll try that. Like, never promise the world when you're telling people to go out and walk in nature.
Because it kind of minimises what they're going through to a degree. Absolutely. As well. I mean, I use my mum as an example. When I was first diagnosed with depression, and it's something that has been sort of like a roller coaster, like it is for most people through the years. My mum is one of the most positive people I know, and like a huge cheerleader. And one of the first things she said was, wait, have you tried going for a walk? And I remember her saying it, and I thought, oh my. And at the time, the headspace I was in was like, are you serious right now? But
honestly, I think most people with depression have had that exact same experience, and it comes from a place of love, but it comes from a place of someone who doesn't understand mental health. And I've had various people say that to me over the years, and it feels minimizing, it feels patronizing, and you just want to slap people when they say that.
There is a degree. It's from the right place, but it's ultimately just shows, okay, maybe there's not the sensitivity to it, or just the understanding, and that's more conversations that can be had around it. I think just improve the understanding, and hopefully mean the conversations are a bit deeper, and compassionate as well sometimes as well. Okay, so I'll touch upon just very quickly around that connection to something bigger than you as well from a work context, because I think I do a lot of advisory work now with businesses that are building their employee value proposition, and the fourth pillar, so I've got 4 pillars to that, the fourth one being meaningful work, and that's sometimes shifted out from other things, but for me it's meaningful work. So that is a connection, or at least an awareness of the impact you're making. Not only that can be on the business and the broader business, so understanding the value you're adding to that company, how is that actually identified and recognised and celebrated, but also that the work you're doing is having an impact on society more broadly as well.
Yeah.
And I think businesses that are putting things like that together need to understand that people are driven in different ways, and actually doing something like giving volunteer days out, which seems to be happening more on benefits lists now. A day volunteering each year, I'd say that's kind of like dipping your toe in, like dipping part of your toe into the water. But I think it's really important to maybe be offering that opportunity to your people to get out there in the community and make an impact beyond your day-to-day work as well. So
I completely agree. I mean, I did a talk last month called "All Fur Coat and No Knickers for Sick in the City," and it was about that, about basically about superficial wellness strategies being like a hey Dougie sticking plaster on a gaping abdominal wound. And I talked about how I was like, employee well-being, I think, has been overcomplicated, and it really isn't. It's not complicated. It's because essentially, what I call employees is humans who happen to work for you, and employees are human beings. So employee well-being is human well-being, and that's what the whole concept of good well-being is. That it's that I am an expert in human well-being, and humans are my bread and butter. I've spent years looking after humans. I understand what humans need. So if you put me in charge of looking after the humans who happen to work for you, then I can help them be happier, and you don't really have to be involved. Because I feel like a lot of companies, like, they overthink it, and they'll take sort of, concepts that they've seen, like desk yoga, and they go, oh, we'll put all that into the wellbeing package. The employees will love that. And it's like, well, humans are very individual people. Like, not everyone's going to love that. Why don't you ask them what they want, first of all? But also just remember that, like, comes to that hierarchy of needs pyramid, doesn't it? And, like, the basics of looking after the humans who happen to work for you is decent pay, paid holiday, paid sick leave, and making sure that they are supported mentally and physically to do the work that you've given them to do. And then, another layer to that is connection to what their work, connection to the humans around them, connection to nature. Like, all of those things are important. But I just think we've overcomplicated employee wellbeing, and we've forgotten about the human aspect of it, because employees are humans. Like, it's really not that bloody hard to look after them.
No, well, I think you explained that brilliantly on your website as well. And what I really liked about it, and there's two questions I'll ask on the back of this after making this point, but what I loved about your website is talking about, if you're a business looking to look after your people, sign them up, because and again, on the back of this, we'll talk about your offering as well in a bit more detail, but sign them up to the platform and essentially just bugger off and let me do the work. Hand them over to me. Because if you really care, it's not an exercise that you can use for your marketing. It's not. Yeah. This is genuinely, you are appealing to companies that genuinely give a shit about their people. So leave them with me.
Doesn't seem to be that many of them.
Well, I think platforms, God knows what the following for this podcast will be like, Zoe. I'm hoping it's going to get ears on it. And I think anyone that can bang the drum to really do that in a very genuine way, it should be applauded, because I just thought that was really refreshing to see. Because, the employers don't have to be there on that journey. They could just leave it to someone that specialises in it. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I really don't like about other employee wellbeing platforms is that they just feel very intrusive, very invasive. And I likened it, to being followed around by a curious but slightly aggressive 3-year-old who keeps asking very, very personal questions in the name of wellness, like, have you been for a poo today? When did you last stand up? Oh, how many steps have you done today? When did you last drink water? What's your resting heart rate? What's that thing on your face? Like, how is that helpful? Is that wellness, or is that just adding to the mental load, the mental chaos, adding to the virtual to-do list that we all have expanding in the back of our brains? Like,
really good point.
Just, I just feel like we need to go back to basics, and that's just, how do you want to look after your well-being as a human? It doesn't really matter that you're in work. Like, what do you need as a human being, and what are your needs? And I just think more than anything, employers, they need to be asking their employees what they want, like, rather than just making the decision for them. They need to be saying, what do you need? Like, if you've got the basics in place, that's what you need to be asking them. If you haven't got the basics in place, put the bloody basics in place and then ask them what they want.
It has to be done at the foundational level, doesn't it, as well? And that's where I enjoy working with startup and scaling businesses, because they're at that stage where it's not, okay, we've got reverse and everything's in hindsight, and we've got to kind of reverse engineer where we are now to put those foundations in. As you're building, get them in place. Offer your people, even if you haven't got many people at that stage, get your offering right, and then it will just build this foundation that is less likely to crumble, because everyone's there going, you don't give a shit, and you're not listening to us. So I think that's
completely. And I think, like, neuro inclusivity massively feeds into that, and that's like a lot of the work that I'm doing now is about helping businesses, build neuro inclusive policies into their workplace, because I would wager that if you took a cross section of employees who have had difficulty at work, a large high percentage of them would be neurodivergent. And that's because neurodivergent people really struggle in the workplace for many reasons: sensory overload, communication difficulties. But it doesn't have to be like that. There are simple things you can do as an employer to make your neurodivergent employees' working life much easier. And honestly, neurodivergent employees are such an asset to your company, because we are particularly, I mean, all types of neurodivergencies. We are the out of the box thinkers. We are the true ideas people. You meet these wankers that are like, oh, I'm an ideas man. I don't do the thing. I'm just an ideas man.
Yeah.
But we are your ideas people. Put a penny in the slot, press the button. I'll give you 100 ideas. Like, in 10 minutes. Like, we're not great at executing them, but
you need the genesis though, don't you? You need the spark, you need the motivation, and that's what comes as well. Yeah, I think you've hit on a really good point as well, and I think that's where so much of the value you're offering now to companies that are with so much more of a spotlight being shone on neurodiversity in the workplace, and what companies are needing to put in place to support people as well, beyond just the tick box of diversity and inclusion as well, which it's a huge conversation point at the moment. And again, you can tell the companies that are taking it seriously from a mile off. Have you got, I mean, I don't want you to give too much free advice away, but just can you give me a couple of examples of what businesses can be doing to make their workplaces more inclusive for people, neurodivergent people?
So I would say the first thing, and probably the biggest thing, is awareness. Okay. Because, like, coming back to the point I was saying about a lot of neurodivergent people not realizing they're neurodivergent until they have their light bulb moment. And so awareness and opening the conversation allows those neurodivergent people to actually recognize that they're neurodivergent, because they may have been struggling in their workplace and not really understanding why. And if you run like a neurodiversity awareness day, which I do, by the way, if you run that, then you are creating an environment in which more neurodivergent people might be like, oh, maybe that's me. And they might go off and do their own assessments. And then they might come back and be like, oh, actually, I think I might have autism, or I think I might have ADHD. What that also does is help your current neurodivergent employees realize that you're trying to be more neuroinclusive. So if they haven't disclosed to you that they're neurodivergent, which is common, because there's a lot of shame still around being neurodivergent, it will help them come forward and then communicate that with you, so you can then act on it, because you cannot act if you do not know. So that's the number one thing I would say, is awareness days, and just opening that conversation, making sure you know the right language, that you're using inclusive language around neurodiversity. So that's the biggest thing. I think once you have that information, act on it and ask them what their needs are. I think, there's lots of things now about how you can sort of create like sensory rooms for people to kind of retreat to if they're struggling, because like lots of like open plan offices are a fucking nightmare.
I've read this, yeah.
And they're so common. But I mean, it just, so when I say that my brain is like having 50 tabs open with music coming from 8 of them and a pop-up ad for cryptocurrency coming up every 30 seconds, I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
Like that, but that's just my internal brain. And then also, if I'm talking to you, for instance, in a cafe and there's lots of people around me, I'm not just listening to our conversation, I'm also picking up on about 5 or 6 different conversations, and holding that focus when I'm talking to you is exhausting. So when that's your work environment and you've got someone behind you making a really loud sales call and you're trying to focus on, building a website, absolute nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's it. I think it's the actual physical environment as well, isn't it, that you're working in? And that's even more important where there's this apparent drive now from businesses that are calling people back to the workplace in droves, in the hope that, I don't know, for me, all the figures are skewed around productivity and a drop in productivity because remote working. But see what happens when you bring people back to the office in those environments where they're not thriving in as well. Yeah. I think that's a super important point to make. For businesses that are approaching these kind of exercises around well-being and then wondering, what's the return on investment? I knew this might garner this reaction from you, Zoe. Because so many businesses in loads of different avenues, they want to spend money and want to say, okay, well, we're spending this money. What's going to be the return?
I'll tell you what your return on your fucking investment is. Your return on investment is healthy employees who enjoy working for you and who won't fucking leave because they're stressed up to their eyeballs because you've created a toxic workplace environment. That's your return on investment. Your return on investment is happy, healthy, retained employees.
I love it. That is going to be the soundbite, I think, for this episode. Honestly, no, I had a feeling it might garner that reaction because I agree completely. There are things that in business you have to have a return on. You have to be able to monitor it. You have to be able to quantify it. Your employee well-being or human well-being of people that work for you, it's just not one. Ultimately.
Not one, but also, I mean, thing is, it is a return on investment because I can't remember what the figures of retaining an employee versus recruiting an employee.
Yes.
It's much more expensive to find an employee who wants to work for you rather than just looking after the ones you already have. And that in itself is a return on investment because you're not spending thousands of pounds trying to find some other mug who wants to come and work for fucking not another money laundering corp NFT company.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
It's a really good point, and it's often only when you've realised how you've fucked up by not supporting your people that you're then like, oh, I've got another bill to pay someone like me that comes in and finds the backfill and the replacement to go in as well.
I mean, one of my favourite pastimes is was this awful digital healthcare company that I worked for that I technically can't talk about because I did take them to a tribunal. Yeah. But the schadenfreude I used to get from going on glassdoor.co.uk and just reading all of the awful reviews about these employees and realising that after I left, nothing had changed and they were still an extremely, extremely toxic workplace. I was like, those reviews, they speak volumes and they have such a high staff turnover. And any company that has that high of a staff turnover, there is something going seriously, seriously wrong.
Yeah.
You're hemorrhaging money, you're hemorrhaging employees. You need to fix it or you're going to drown.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think you've touched upon so many of the points that I wanted to discuss with you, really, Zoe. And for me, I'd like to give you a bit of a platform now to talk about what you've got coming up in the future and what you're offering people as well as part of your service, because I know it's evolving and it will evolve as I think the spotlight being shone on a number of issues that people are going through evolves as well, that all fall under the wellbeing banner. So talk to me about what you've got in the pipeline and what's happening in the business, if that's not too broad a question to ask.
Yeah. I mean, I think, wellbeing has definitely evolved from when we launched in October. In all honesty, I basically launched completely burnt out because it had taken so much of my energy to actually get it across the finish line. So I sort of launched it and then didn't really talk about it that much on social. So the platform is the core, the platform being very much like a sort of library of wellbeing resources, everything from, videos, like yoga classes to written articles by me. And that's the sort of core dip in, dip out content. But on top of that, I'm now working one-to-one, doing a blend of sort of mentoring and coaching, I'm calling it, because it's for women, primarily women and non-binary folk who have ADHD and who are struggling with overwhelm, burnout, and just struggling with knowing how to kind of put themselves first and look after the well-being, which is a huge problem. The reason it's focused mainly on women and non-binary folk are because those are the ones who seem to struggle the most. I think women carry a lot of, mothers in particular carry a lot of the mental load in the household. So when you're a mother with ADHD, particularly if you also have ADHD or neurodivergent children, it's a very, very, very difficult thing to prioritize your own well-being. So I'm working one-to-one with women, helping them to kind of put boundaries in place and how to kind of prioritize their well-being. So that's one really exciting thing that I've just recently started doing, and it's brilliant. And so there's that. And phase 2 of Wellbeing is evolving. It's probably going to launch autumn, winter. I'm being particularly vague because I don't want to put pressure on myself and burn out while I'm doing it. But what that will entail is essentially much more of my face on the platform. Yep. So much more engagement with me in a group basis and on a one-to-one basis. So I'm going to be running ADHD peer support groups within the platform, ADHD group wellbeing coaching within the platform, and also having a monthly expert masterclass from everything from sort of ADHD nutrition, parenting when you have ADHD, being an entrepreneur when you have ADHD. So various people from various industries talking about their expertise with ADHD. And the fourth thing that I'm going to be adding in, which was always part of the plan, is creative workshops. So very much a merging of making Creating Well Good to kind of be more one thing rather than two separate things.
Yep.
The reason for that is that creativity for neurodivergent brains, and for anyone really, but particularly neurodivergent brains, is incredibly useful. I call my creative workshops, meditation for the hands, because a wonderful thing happens that when you are creating, it's about the only time that my brain just sort of goes quiet. Particularly if I'm doing like macrame or watercolors, like the repetitive, soothing motion, all of the kind of music from all of the tabs just sort of turns down. And if I sit and try and meditate without being creative, it's very loud and chaotic, and it's not that pleasant.
Yeah.
So I think it's an integral part of neurodivergent well-being is actually being creative. So I'm going to be running virtual creative workshops as part of phase 2 of Well Good Wellbeing. On top of that, there wasn't enough.
No, I love it.
I'm also doing, in terms of workplace wellbeing stuff, I'm doing a lot more, like I'm doing kind of, talks within workplaces about everything from just general workplace wellbeing stuff to neuroinclusivity in the workplace. Also running peer support groups, like employee resource groups for businesses who want to set them up for their neurodivergent employees, which I think is a brilliant thing that people are doing. I think sometimes, particularly with neurodivergent peer support groups, it's useful to have an expert who can help train up an employee in running those ERGs for neurodivergent employees, so they know exactly what they're doing, and also offering a sort of monthly check-in with them to make sure that all is well. Because I think, as much as being the head of an ERG is a great thing for someone to do, it can also take up a lot of the time, and they don't get any extra benefits really for it. It's just sort of part of what they do. So I think it's important to give them that support. And God, I mean, there's a whole heap of stuff I've got. Actually, do you know what I should do? I should give you my business brochure, and you can attach it to the podcast, because there's a whole heap of stuff that I do, from neurodiversity awareness days to talks and events, and one-on-one training with HR reps and things.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think what we'll do, we'll include all of that in the notes and on the back of this, and put some collateral out for you. I think from my side, you've just gone through your kind of service in a holistic level, but it sounds, if people can't see the value they could potentially get from working with you, they're mad, in my opinion. But if a business, a leader, someone in a function that has capacity to work with you is listening to this, what do they have to do on the back of listening to this episode to reach out and start speaking with you?
I'd say email me. Yep. Probably the easiest thing to do. hello@wellgoodwellbeing.com. That's the best thing to do. Okay. I'm very good at answering emails. I'm invariably on LinkedIn, depending on how overwhelmed I'm feeling. But email, I will always check. So yeah, that's the simplest, most straightforward thing to do.
Fantastic. Zoe, I've absolutely loved that conversation. There are so many sound bites and nuggets that I'm going to use in the marketing for it as well. I do have a closing tradition on this podcast, if it's okay. I'm conscious of your time, but if you've listened to a quite a famous podcast, the Diary of a CEO podcast with Stephen, I know you like that one as well. He has a closing tradition of someone asking a question. I've stolen that to a degree, but it's actually my mum asking a question at the end of these episodes, if that's okay.
Okay.
I've got a voice note of my mum who's I don't listen to the question before, so she could be asked anything. She knows at a high level about you and the discussion that we've roughly had, but I'm just going to play it down the phone.
All right.
Hi, Dr. Zoe. I wonder if you could tell me if there's any small thing that we could do each day that would really make a big difference to how we feel at work. Or if there's any benefit in how we position even the chair that we sit on. Thank you very much.
I can only apologise, Zoe. It's it's one of these things you just roll the dice and see what you get. But that's so that's.
At least you didn't ask me a personal medical question. I mean, that would have been really awkward.
She sent me a picture as well. Can you just no? So one. Let's focus on the first bit. Maybe not the positioning of a chair. I feel like it was a bit left field. But just one thing that we can be doing each day for our well-being at work. Thanks, Mum. Appreciate that one.
God, that's an interesting question. I think I would probably just say get outside, at least, on a coffee break or a lunch break. Get outside and breathe and just get yourself out of that work environment. And I wrote about this on LinkedIn actually a while back about I think I don't know if it's a me thing or if it's an ADHD thing, but I really hate eating my lunch with colleagues. I really hate it. I hate listening to people chewing. I hate the smell of other people's food, and I very much need 30 minutes to myself to completely decompress, watch silly cat videos, and forget about work. So if we're talking about things I could do for my well-being and work, it would be I would just go outside and eat my lunch outside with nobody around me. Maybe go and sit in the park and just enjoy not having any other human beings around. But if you're not like me and you do enjoy having your lunch with colleagues, then rather than sitting in the staff room, I would say maybe go outside and eat. I mean, it's tricky because sometimes the weather is horrible, but as Billy Connolly says, there's no such thing as bad weather, just the rank clothes. So get outside.
It's a really good point. Yeah, just exit that environment and have a change of scenery, I think is really important. Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for entertaining my mum's question. I appreciate it. Zoe, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're incredibly busy as well with everything that you've got going on. All the services you've listed there must be taking up God knows how much of your time at the moment. So I really appreciate that, and I'll let you get on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to Jobsworth. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to like and subscribe. You can stay connected by following me on LinkedIn for more insights on the world of work, behind the scenes content, and updates on upcoming episodes. We're already thinking about guests for season 2, so if there is a particular topic you'd like us to discuss, then please send in your suggestions to hello@jobsworth.com.